Battle of Marathon, 490 BC. In 490 BC, the Persian Empire under King Darius I launched an invasion of Greece to punish Athens for supporting the Ionian Revolt. A Persian force of approximately 25,000 men landed at the Bay of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenian army, heavily outnumbered with roughly 10,000 hoplites, blocked their advance. The Athenian general Miltiades executed a highly unconventional tactic. He thinned the center of his phalanx formation and reinforced the flanks. When the Greeks charged, the Persians easily pushed through the weak center, completely unaware they were walking into a trap. The reinforced Greek flanks crushed the Persian wings and then wheeled inward, enveloping the Persian forces. The Persians panicked and fled to their ships, suffering immense casualties. This decisive victory proved that the seemingly invincible Persian military could be defeated, ensuring the survival of early Athenian democracy and Western political thought. Battle of Thermopylae, 480 BC. 10 years after Marathon, the Persian king Xerxes I returned with a massive invasion force estimated at over 100,000 troops. To delay the advance, a small alliance of Greek city-states, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, took up a defensive position at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass known as the Hot Gates. For 2 full days, the Greek force of roughly 7,000 men, anchored by 300 elite Spartans, repelled wave after wave of Persian assaults. The narrow terrain nullified the Persian numerical advantage. However, a local Greek named Ephialtes betrayed the alliance, revealing a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persians to outflank the Greek position. Knowing they were surrounded, Leonidas dismissed the majority of the army and remained behind, with his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans to fight to the death. While a tactical defeat, the severe delay allowed Athens to evacuate and build the naval fleet that would eventually defeat the Persians at Salamis. Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC. Alexander the Great led his Macedonian army into Mesopotamia to finalize the conquest of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. King Darius III assembled a massive army, including heavily armored cavalry and scythed chariots, on the flat plains of Gaugamela, terrain specifically chosen to maximize his numerical superiority. Alexander countered this by advancing his troops at an angle, a tactic known as the oblique order. As the battle commenced, Alexander led his elite companion cavalry out to the right flank, stretching the Persian lines and forcing Darius to send his own cavalry to intercept. This maneuver created a gap in the Persian center. Alexander immediately reversed direction, formed his men into a massive wedge, and charged directly at Darius. Facing the charging Macedonian phalanx, Darius fled the battlefield, causing his army to collapse. This victory effectively ended the Persian Empire and initiated the Hellenistic period, spreading Greek culture, language, and administration across the Middle East and parts of Asia. Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. During the Second Punic War, Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca marched an army, including war elephants, over the Alps and into Italy. At Cannae, a massive Roman army of 86,000 men formed a deep, dense formation intended to smash through the Carthaginian center through sheer brute force. Hannibal placed his least reliable infantry in the center of his line in a convex bow shape, with his elite heavy infantry held back on the flanks. As the Romans attacked, the Carthaginian center deliberately yielded, slowly bowing backward. The Romans pushed forward into the center, effectively crowding themselves. Simultaneously, Hannibal's superior cavalry routed the Roman cavalry and attacked the Roman infantry from the rear. The Carthaginian heavy infantry then closed in from the sides. The Romans were completely encircled in a classic double envelopment maneuver. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers were slaughtered in a single afternoon. Cannae remains the gold standard of tactical annihilation and is studied in military academies worldwide. Battle of Tours, 732 AD. In the early 8th century, The Umayyad Caliphate expanded rapidly out of the Middle East, conquering North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. An Umayyad army of an estimated 20,000 to 80,000 cavalry under Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi crossed the Pyrenees and advanced into modern-day France. They were met between the cities of Tours and Poitiers by a Frankish army led by Charles Martel. Martel positioned his men on a wooded, elevated hill, forming a tightly packed infantry square. For 7 days, the forces engaged in skirmishes. When the Umayyad heavy cavalry finally charged, they were unable to break the dense Frankish infantry formation. The fighting was brutal, and during the chaos, Charles Martel sent scouts to raid the Umayyad camp. Fearing the loss of their loot, many Umayyad cavalrymen broke ranks and retreated. Abdul Rahman was killed while trying to rally his troops, and the Umayyad army withdrew the following night. This battle permanently halted the Islamic expansion into Western Europe. Battle of Hastings, 1066 AD. Following the death of the childless king, Edward the Confessor, the English throne was contested. William, Duke of Normandy, invaded England to seize the crown from the newly crowned King Harold Godwinson. The armies met at Senlac Hill near Hastings. Harold's Anglo-Saxon army formed a highly effective shield wall on top of the ridge, successfully repelling the Norman archers and heavy cavalry. Unable to break the line, William employed a strategy of feigned retreats. Norman cavalry would charge, then pretend to flee in panic. Inexperienced English soldiers broke the shield wall to pursue them down the hill, where the Normans abruptly turned around and slaughtered them. After repeated feigned retreats, the English line thinned. Late in the day, King Harold was struck in the eye by an arrow and killed, leading to the collapse of the English army. William the Conqueror's victory fundamentally replaced the English aristocracy, introduced the feudal system, and permanently altered the English language by infusing it with Norman French. Battle of Agincourt, 1415 AD. During the Hundred Years' War, a depleted, disease-ridden English army under King Henry V was intercepted by a significantly larger French force. The battle took place in a narrow strip of land between two dense woods, heavily funneling the French advance. The terrain was composed of freshly plowed fields that had been soaked by torrential rain, creating deep, thick mud. The French relied heavily on their heavily armored noble cavalry and men-at-arms. As the French advanced, they sank in the mud, moving at a slow crawl. The English army, composed primarily of longbowmen, unleashed continuous volleys of armor-piercing arrows. The funneling effect in the mud caused a devastating crush among the French ranks, resulting in thousands of French nobles being killed or suffocated under the weight of fallen men and horses. Agincourt demonstrated the absolute lethal superiority of the English longbow and marked the beginning of the end for the dominance of heavily armored medieval knights. Battle of Constantinople, 1453 AD. The city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was protected by the Theodosian walls, considered the most formidable defensive structures in the medieval world. In 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to the city with an army of 100,000 men. He brought a new devastating weapon, massive bronze cannons, including the Basilica Bombard, which fired 1,200-pound stone balls directly into the ancient walls. When Byzantine defenders blocked the Golden Horn harbor with a massive chain, Mehmed ordered his ships to be rolled across land on greased logs to bypass the barricade. After a 53-day siege, the constant bombardment opened a breach in the walls, and Ottoman janissaries stormed the city. Emperor Constantine XI died in the final assault. The fall of Constantinople ended the Roman Empire, established the Ottoman Empire as a major European power, and severed the primary overland trade routes to Asia, forcing European nations to seek maritime routes, directly sparking the Age of Discovery. Battle of Lepanto, 1571 AD. As the Ottoman Empire expanded its naval dominance across the Mediterranean, a coalition of Catholic states formed the Holy League to stop them. The two massive fleets clashed in the Gulf of Patras, off the coast of Greece. This was the largest naval battle in Western history since classical antiquity, and the last major engagement fought almost entirely by rowing vessels known as galleys. The Holy League, commanded by Don John of Austria, possessed heavily armed galleasses, large ships loaded with naval artillery, which devastated the Ottoman front lines. The battle devolved into brutal, hand-to-hand infantry combat across the decks of locked ships. The Holy League systematically destroyed or captured the majority of the Ottoman fleet. This decisive victory permanently ended the myth of Ottoman naval invincibility, halted their expansion into the Western Mediterranean, and preserved the political balance of Christian Europe. Battle of Waterloo, 1815 AD. After escaping exile on the island of Elba, Napoleon Bonaparte reclaimed control of France and marched into Belgium to confront the Allied armies gathering against him. He faced an Anglo-led force under the Duke of Wellington and a Prussian army under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Wellington positioned his troops on a reverse slope near the village of Waterloo, shielding them from French artillery. Throughout the day, the French launched massive infantry and cavalry assaults, severely testing the British squares, but failed to break the Allied lines. The defining moment occurred in the late afternoon when Blücher's Prussian army arrived on Napoleon's right flank, having recovered from an earlier defeat at Ligny. Facing enemies on two fronts, Napoleon committed his elite Imperial Guard in a final desperate charge, which was repelled. The French army collapsed into a rout. Waterloo permanently ended Napoleon's rule, dissolved the First French Empire, and established a balance of power in Europe that lasted nearly a century. Battle of Gettysburg, 1863 AD. In the summer of 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee marched the Army of Northern Virginia into Union territory, seeking a decisive victory that would force the United States to negotiate an end to the Civil War. He collided with the Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by General George Meade, at the crossroads town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Union Army secured the high ground along Cemetery Ridge. Over 3 days of intense combat, the Confederates attacked the Union flanks at locations like Little Round Top and Culp's Hill, but failed to dislodge them. On the third day, Lee ordered a massive frontal infantry assault against the center of the Union line, known as Pickett's Charge. Moving across open fields, the Confederate soldiers were decimated by Union artillery and rifle fire, suffering over 50% casualties. Lee was forced to retreat back to Virginia. Gettysburg resulted in over 50,000 casualties, now permanently crippled the offensive capability of Lee's army, and became the definitive turning point of the American Civil War. Battle of Tsushima, 1905 AD. During the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian Empire sent its Baltic fleet on an arduous 7-month, 18,000-mile voyage to the Far East to break the Japanese blockade of Port Arthur. Japanese Admiral Togo Heihachiro intercepted the Russian fleet in the Tsushima Strait. Togo executed a classic naval maneuver known as crossing the T, directing his ships across the path of the advancing Russian column. This allowed the Japanese battleships to bring all their broadside guns to bear, while the Russian ships could only fire their forward-facing guns. Utilizing superior speed, advanced rangefinders, and highly explosive Shimose shells, the Japanese completely annihilated the Russian fleet. Russia lost 8 battleships, numerous smaller vessels, and over 5,000 men, while Japan lost only 3 torpedo boats. This total victory forced Russia to sue for peace. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation defeated a major European power, establishing Japan as a dominant naval force. Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943 AD. In a drive to secure the oil fields of the Caucasus, Adolf Hitler ordered the German Sixth Army to capture the industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The battle devolved into absolute, brutal urban warfare. Soviet troops under General Vasily Chuikov contested every street, factory, and room in what the Germans called Ratternkrieg, Rat War. The closeness of the fighting negated the German advantage in air support and armor. As winter set in, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive targeting the weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces, protecting the German flanks outside the city. The Soviet armies successfully punched through the flanks and linked up, trapping over 250,000 German soldiers inside a tightening pocket. Starving, freezing, and out of ammunition, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered in February 1943. Stalingrad cost over 2 million lives, destroyed the myth of the invincible Wehrmacht, and permanently turned the tide of World War II against Nazi Germany. Battle of Normandy, 1944 A.D. To break the German grip on Western Europe, the Allies launched Operation Overlord on June 6, 1944. Commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, an armada of over 5,000 vessels landed 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops on 5 heavily fortified beaches in Normandy, France, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The operation required massive deception campaigns, airborne drops to secure flanks, and unprecedented logistical support. The German defenses, part of the Atlantic Wall, inflicted heavy casualties, particularly on Omaha Beach, where U.S. troops faced heavily entrenched machine gun positions on high bluffs. However, the Allies secured a beachhead by the end of the day. The subsequent breakout from Normandy led to the liberation of Paris and the eventual push into Germany itself. D-Day successfully opened the long-awaited Western Front, forcing Nazi Germany into a two-front war it could not sustain. Note Battle of Midway, 1942 A.D. Just 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto planned an offensive against the Midway atoll to draw out and destroy the remaining American aircraft carriers. However, American cryptanalysts at Station Hypo intercepted and broke the Japanese naval codes, uncovering the date and location of the attack. Armed with this intelligence, Admiral Chester Nimitz positioned his 3 available carriers in an ambush position northeast of Midway. On June 4th, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carrier fleet at its most vulnerable moment, while their decks were crowded with aircraft refueling and rearming. In a span of just 5 minutes, American bombers critically damaged 3 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. A 4th carrier, Hiryu, was sunk later that day. The loss of 4 elite carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable, highly trained pilots permanently crippled the offensive power of the Imperial Japanese Navy, decisively turning the tide of the Pacific War. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.